Hey everyone, and welcome to Rock Video Rental. I'm Caleb, and usually with me is Brandon. Unfortunately, he was not able to make it this week for this episode. So we're going to do like we usually do. The intro is going to be rather short because I actually do not have much that has been going on. I am actually on vacation this week, so I've been out of town. So not a lot of movie watching. Certainly nothing new, but having some episodes on on the TV while we've been uh, at the place we've been staying at. So catching a little bit of Cheers, maybe here or there, a little bit of Frasier. The sad information this week coming out that the Norm character went totally blanking on his first name, did pass away from the Cheers show. Like I said, watching some Frasier, catching a little bit of Seinfeld. And then I did watch an episode of the Sherlock Holmes series with the Benedict Cumberbatch, as well as The Dark Knight Rises, and a part of a Mission Impossible movie. Nothing full and complete for really any of them, but just some of that stuff that you kind of have on the background, at the end of the day before you're getting ready for bed. So nothing too crazy new. I know that, of course, the new Mission Impossible movie is coming out. So I'm kind of behind on that series, so I don't think I'm going to really get into that one too much. It's not exactly my most favorite series, anyways. So, but nothing too much to get into with that. I know Brandon's usually the one who's got weekly new updates and things like that. So we will be going ahead and just jumping right into this week's episode with the movie Ravenous. So, this week's movie, Ravenous from 1999, it is a horror, also labeled as a dark comedy, and it was directed by Antonia Bird, and kind of a star-studded cast or a well-known cast. We have Guy Pearce as Boyd, Robert Carlyle as Ives, and then David Arquette as Cleves, Jeremy Davies as Toffler, Jeffrey Jones as Hart, John Spencer as General Slarson, and Neil McDonough as Private Reich. I mean, all of those actors are recognizable, and some of them a little bit more recent than others. Robert Carlyle, I feel like, is the one that you hear more about recently, but Guy Pearce, I mean, come on, he's got a slew of movies. I feel like mostly from the 90s and 2000s that he's best known for. And of course, if you go back even further, you've got Jeffrey Jones as the ever popular principal for Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Kind of an interesting setup this movie was. And so I'll give you the synopsis here. In a remote military outpost in the 19th century, Captain John Boyd and his regiment embark on a rescue mission, which takes a dark turn when they are ambushed by a sadistic cannibal. So this one's actually a little bit interesting too for me because I actually had seen this previously years ago, probably around 2001, 2002 time frame, I would say. And I remember enjoying it, and I remember it being more of a kind of stalker slasher movie, and it was quite different than I remembered. Obviously, there were some things that were still there, that were very vivid, but as far as like the feel for the entire movie, this movie is much slower. It is a much slower movie, and it is not, there's not very much excitement. I feel like it's more methodical and purposeful, but it is a unique watch. It is definitely much different than a lot of the other movies that you'll kind of see in the horror genre. But I don't know. It's very interesting to me because I don't know what it was. I'm not sure what it caused it to maybe be a little bit glorified for me. I never really talked this movie up a whole lot. I did say that I thought it was good. And I know that we've had different things about talking about it, having it on the show. But I wasn't supportive, including it at some point. And honestly, after watching it, I would probably say it wasn't the greatest recommendation. It is more, like I already said, it is a unique movie and it's worth watching. I wouldn't necessarily say it's worth much of a recommendation. Like if you've got time to watch movies from this genre, there are plenty of other movies that you could watch that would be more interesting and more unique. I feel like this is more of an artistic take on a horror movie, not necessarily from how it was filmed, but from how the story was told, I guess you would say. So I'll walk through the general movie and then kind of break down certain parts of it. Essentially, Guy Pearce's character was in the Mexican American War, and he was a coward. He faked being dead in a battle, which actually, when he kind of came to and tried to escape, which he was in a pile of dead bodies, he was behind enemy lines and he wound up helping take an outpost because he was behind enemy lines. He didn't really do anything glamorous. He didn't really kill anybody. He just kind of like, it was a small group of soldiers and he was able to catch them off guard and took them prisoner, essentially. And so he was awarded for that, but then afterwards it kind of became recognizable that he was more of a coward than anything, so they decided to ship him off to a remote place in the Rocky Mountains somewhere. I can't remember if it was Colorado specifically, but just somewhere more in the Rocky Mountains. And so he gets shipped to a remote outpost, and shortly after he's there, it's a very small outpost, only a few people. After he's there for a little while, a civilian shows up out of nowhere and claims to have been with a party that got snowed in into the mountains, and that he said that it got so bad that once people started dying, they started eating each other, and he fled for his life because he was scared that he was going to be one of the next ones to be killed. And claimed that there was one person, a man who was still there, and a woman that was still there, expecting that the woman was probably going to be killed by the other individual. Well, Boyd, played by Guy Pearce, and his fellow regime members at the outpost felt it was their obligation that they go and they try to save the woman, figure out what happened, and take care of things because it's in their jurisdiction or in their region. So this character that came in, Ives, played by Robert Carlyle, who's a part of the party that got lost in the mountains, leads them out there to where the cave was, and he acts weird, he acts unusual, he acts suspicious. He takes them out there, and essentially it was a trap. He was the one who wound up killing all the other members and being cannibalistic. And so while they are there, he starts attacking them, and it seems a little bit ridiculous on how it happened. But how many guys was it? It was Ives, and then there was one, two, three, four, five soldiers of Boyd's group. I want to say there were five total soldiers, and that one guy took out five of them. There's a little bit that goes into part of that concept because they did get split up, but he wound up taking out basically all of them. Guy Pearce, though, was the last one surviving, and he decided to jump off of a cliff instead of being killed by Ives, and he wound up escaping that way. He got hurt. His leg got hurt really bad, broken really bad, and he wound up actually falling kind of in a pit area where another one of his uh, team members had fallen into after he had died. So then it turns into a little bit of a survival thing where Ives, who is already a cannibal, is eating the other members of the group that he had killed, and Boyd is stuck in a pit essentially with one of his team members, and it makes it so that it's essentially days and weeks. I don't know if I would say months passed. I think from the time lapse that they were doing, it was kind of showing the transition of the moon pattern. So I want to say it was around a month. So he was stuck in this hole, and so he wound up to survive eating his other team member. And so he wound up going cannibalistic as well. Now, one thing that had been kind of like a theory thing going on was just like if you eat part of another person, like you become stronger and everything. And so essentially, it also helped him to recover from his wounds. He makes it back to camp, tells everybody what's happened, but nobody really believed them. More soldiers came in to kind of investigate what was going on. They still didn't believe him because there was no evidence to support it. And they left somebody to be in charge of him. And it wound up being that Ives had infiltrated and somehow convinced them that he was part of the military. And so they left Ives in charge. And of course, that freaks Boyd out. And up until this point, not a lot really happened except for the scuffle with the whole team in the mountain. And so again, this is kind of that slow burn that goes on. But then Ives think weird things start happening at the camp, and Boyd just goes crazy from it. And so everybody thinks that Boyd is crazy and Boyd is doing the things. And then some team members get sent to go get more soldiers to come back, the general and more soldiers. And while they're gone, essentially Boyd and Ives have their big showdown. And kind of, I guess, what I would say is the twist in the movie is that one of the original military group that was killed by Ives actually wasn't killed. He was turned into a cannibal and he had teamed up with Ives. So, kind of a unique concept and everything because it was Hart, played by Jeffrey Jones. He was able to be kept alive because he went cannibalistic and it was able to help him recover from his wounds. But Boyd tries to fight the urge to keep living the cannibalistic life, and he is able to convince Hart that it's not really worth it. And Hart has a breakdown, and Guy Pearce, playing Boyd, essentially has a big showdown with Ives, and they fight each other to death, where they actually wind up both dying from their wounds. And at the end of the movie, kind of the typical twist of, oh, it's not really over, is that Ives and Hart had made a stew out of one of the regime members at the camp that they had killed. And so they made a stew. So it was a cannibalistic meat stew. And so even though Ives had been killed and all the cannibals, essentially the link had been broken, that stew is still there at the camp. And right before the movie ends, it shows that one of the people, when they came back to investigate the scene, started eating the soup. So essentially, this cycle never ends, is what they go with. So a very high level view of the movie, but honestly, with how much of a slow burn it was, that covers most of it. And like I said, it was a very interesting experience for me because I felt like I remembered it being so much more of a stalker killer movie. Like once Boyd got back to the camp, I just remembered that people started dying and that felt like Ives was stalking them. And so that would have been for me more of an entertaining take on it. Now, I understand that you don't have to do everything the same. They were taking a different approach to this and everything. But I do feel like it kind of hindered it. It is, like I said, not going to be your atypical horror movie with how it's set up, but I feel like it just dragged a bit too much. But one of the things that actually broke it for me with this movie that kind of um, pulls you out of the movie, like kind of jars you from the movie, is honestly the soundtrack. The soundtrack was quite unusual, and I think it kind of leads into the dark comedy aspect of it, um, where the music almost makes it sound like something's supposed to be funny or off about it. And it doesn't quite fit. Now, sometimes it's so weird, unusual that it's more menacing than anything else. But for the most part, it just really kind of almost startles you or makes you, it removes how most horror movies try to create that eerie mood, where they pull you in and can make you feel uneasy and everything, where this music is almost kind of reminding you that you're watching a movie instead of actually being in the movie. So I don't really think that that was one of the best things for it. It just seemed like an unusual choice. Like I said, there were certain parts in the movie where it kind of worked a little bit with the feeling of insanity. But for the most part, I don't think it worked super well for it. Now, something that did work rather well, I wouldn't say it was a home run and everything. Like I said, the cast was kind of a star-studded cast. Like you watch this movie and there's not a lot of people in it. And the people that they had in it were all recognizable characters. Um, but they all did quite well. Um, Guy Pearce did really well. Robert Carlyle did really well. The one that was unusual for me, and I think this may have just impacted me, but probably a lot of other people who've seen it too. But Jeffrey Jones's heart, his character being more prolonged through the movie and everything, it's a little bit difficult to take him super serious because of his previous roles. So for that, for me, with this setting of this movie, was not super effective. Now, while watching this movie and preparing for this episode, Brandon and I were texting a little bit, and he actually said the same thing about David Arquette being in the movie, where he just feels like it's difficult to take David Arquette super serious. So you kind of have some of those things. Um, David Arquette's character was supposed to be kind of goofy and dumb, anyways, but I feel like they maybe should have cast somebody else instead for that because I don't know, just the different roles surrounding David Arquette and everything, like it also kind of removed you from that seriousness of like doom, gloom, are we going to make it life or death situation? Just rather confusing. And so it's kind of throwing a lot of emotions at you and situations. So you're not really being able to rest and focus on what's happening, in my opinion. It's like throwing a lot of curveballs at you, which I think in this case did more damage than it did good. But in general, the acting was pretty good. I mean, no one necessarily did a bad job. Um, I think it's a weird combination of the music, the pacing, and some of the choices that they use for the roles for the actors. If you had changed those, I think it could have been a stronger movie. I don't think it would have made it necessarily a home run, but yeah, there were just some things that were kind of holding this movie back. So, um, I mean, let's face it, a horror movie about cannibalism is not the first thing. Um, this isn't the first new thing about that. It was an interesting take on it and everything. And like I said, I actually, I think part of the thing that was difficult for me too is I had higher hopes for this. Again, not super high hopes saying that this was going to be an amazing, excellent movie, but I just remembered it differently on being more of a stalker slasher movie. And since it was a slow burn, it really kind of took me out of the element for it. So there might be a little negative bias, I guess, from me on that standpoint of it not measuring up the way that I remembered it. So it would be interesting to hear Brandon's take, for sure, absolutely on this. He is going to share some thoughts and everything with next week's episode, but also from the aspect that this is a first-time watch for him, he's definitely got some interesting things to take. I do feel like I've been kind of overly negative towards the movie, and I don't. Before I get to final grades a little bit later and everything, I want to say that I don't feel like this is a bad movie. I just feel like I set myself up a little bit for failed expectations because I was going in with some inaccurate thoughts and ideas from having watched the movie so long ago. I mean, we're talking over 20 years ago now at this point. So I'll share my final grades and thoughts at the end of this episode. But I do want to say, I know that I've been a little bit more hypercritical about things with this, but don't want to be overly, to make sure that it's not coming across as overly negative. So, moving forward, I know that usually Brandon has facts and trivia. I do have a little bit of information, not a whole lot though. So I am going to give you what I can here at the end. So, this movie was actually actor John Spencer's last film, not his last acting role, but his last film, because after the release of this movie and until he passed away from a heart attack in 2005, his acting was full time playing a character in the show The West Wing. So he was no longer doing movies during that time. This was partially and very loosely inspired by a story about the Donner Party disaster of 1847. There is another disaster that kind of is tied into the story too. I'll mention that one here in a minute. This did go through director changes very early on, so there were some kind of hiccups, some road bumps at the beginning. So let me see what else I have here. As mentioned before, that the film takes place during the Mexican American War. To give you a time frame on that, that's 1847 when it's supposed to be taking place. And the other story that this was kind of based on. So we talked about the Donner Party story, but there's also a story that this is kind of linked to the story of Alfred Packer, who they call the Colorado Cannibal. And he was a little bit of these stories that kind of overlap is that he was a member of a six man party that got lost in the Colorado Rockies during a harsh winter. He was able to come out of the mountains during the spring thaw. He had reported that one of his companions on his trip had gone crazy and started killing the others to use them for food and meat. And it was then later believed that it was actually Alfred Packer who was the one who had overpowered and killed the remaining five members of his team. So that is another story that is kind of looped into this one. So, according to DVD commentary, there were some cuts that were made to the movie to be able to keep it with an R rating. And the ending was actually, I have two more here. The ending was actually kind of something that was put together by the two main actors, Guy Pearce and Robert Carlyle. The original scripted ending was to take place where they both essentially kind of burned to death while they were fighting on top of one of the buildings and the structures. But then that was gotten rid of when they just wound up doing acting and beating the crap out of each other essentially. And during that final run, the production team actually wound up running out of fake blood because of how much it was drawn out. And then the last thing I have here for facts and trivia is that Guy Pearce was a vegetarian. I don't know if he still is, but at the time of filming this, he was vegetarian. And so uh, he did do things during the movie where he was eating stew. It was a lamb stew, though, of course, but he would eat the stew or take a mouthful of the stew and do filming takes and keep things in his mouth until the director called cut, and then he would spit everything out and not actually consume any of it. So I do not have any information as far as how much this movie cost and what the budget specifically was. So I do not have that information. What I do have are the ratings. So normally I would kind of be guessing about this, but going to be going and looking up this information on IMDb. This movie winds up coming in at a 6.9. So, rather favorable score um, for the movie. And then if we go to Rotten Tomatoes, the critic score came in at a 52%, while things jump up quite a bit higher with the audience score at 78%. So, yeah. To then kind of review and talk about all this, like I said, there are just some things about this movie that just did not really execute extremely well. I do think that was edited rather well, but it was a slow movie. And again, like I said, an element to this that I just don't think helped out was the music. Um, in connection and in tandem with the music, actually at the beginning with the intro credits, it just felt quite goofy. Um, it felt kind of upbeat and funny, energetic almost with the combination of the music and how they were doing the credits. And it just, and I think that's where some of it feeds into the idea of a dark comedy. Because there were some other things too where like you could kind of laugh and chuckle at it and everything during the movie. But I didn't really know what they were trying to go for. When I watched this the first time and when I watched it this time too, I wanted to say that it was going for a more serious and a more um, scary approach. But then it felt like it wasn't taking itself all that serious. So, and I think that kind of, in my opinion, hurt it a little bit. It felt like sometimes like I wanted to be taken seriously, and sometimes I didn't want to be taken seriously, and I felt it was more inconsistent than anything. So that kind of threw a curveball in things. I mentioned my own little bit of struggles with kind of the actor choices. Not that anybody didn't do very good, but just that it felt kind of disjointed and unusual, in my opinion, for some things. So there were just elements to this that kept it from rising above other movies. So again, not a bad movie. If you really are into the horror movie genre, I mean, definitely something worth looking into at some point. If somebody's not really into the horror movie genre, I know it's quite different than a lot of typical horror movies, but I don't know that a lot of people would really enjoy spending the time to get through this specific movie. So I actually wind up giving this a 3.5 out of 5. is my final grade for this movie. So the its uniqueness and everything from the story and some of the execution help it rise above being average, but nothing really helps take it to that next level. Uh, if somebody came to me and talked to me and said, "Hey, I think this is a fantastic film and totally underrated," I probably wouldn't argue too much against them. I think this one comes down to a little bit more personal opinion and everything on just kind of how well the film communicates to the viewer. So, would definitely be interested if anybody replies with their own personal thoughts and reactions to the movie. If you have seen it, if you haven't seen it, and take time to watch it and share your thoughts afterwards, definitely interested in that as well. So, appreciate you listening in next week. Oh man, why am I blanking on what our schedule is for next week? We're still in the horror month. We have The Descent. There we go. So that'll be a first time watch for me, and I know Brandon's seen that one. I want to say multiple times, but he's definitely seen that one. So thanks for checking out Ravenous with us. Um, we appreciate you tuning in. We're on all the major platforms, so you can find content for us on TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, and other places. Um, and if you have any thoughts or feedback on movies for us to review at some point, always reach out. We're interested in those. We've had a few good ones over the years. And I'm really confused. I might mess this up because I can't remember because Brandon said it two different ways, but I want to say that Ravenous was one that was suggested, or it was Identity. I'm 85, 90% sure that it was this week's movie, Ravenous, but he would know for sure. So, yeah, always interested in hearing those ideas. But thanks again for hanging out. And as always, until next time, be kind, rewind.